I'm Chris, and I wanted to take a moment today to just chat with you about the SAT wrong answer penalty and try to set the record straight. So a lot of times students hear, unfortunately, really bad advice about what to do on the SAT when it comes to omitting questions. So the important thing to understand is mathematically how the wrong answer penalty works out. As many of you already know, points-wise, the wrong answer penalty for a missed multiple choice question on the SAT is minus a quarter of a point. But a lot of times the advice given to students tells students things like, don't guess if you're not sure, or there's no penalty for skipping a question, because if you skip it, then you don't get that minus a quarter of a point. Both of those things are categorically wrong and oftentimes told to students by people who don't have much experience in working with students to help prepare them for the SAT. So let's make sure we really understand how the wrong answer penalty works in practice so that you can make a good decision about whether or not to skip a question on test day. So first of all, SAT multiple choice questions, as you may already know, they have 5 answer choices, which means if you're randomly guessing, if you have no idea and you're completely randomly guessing, statistically speaking, as we see here, you would get 1 out of 5 questions correct. The +1 for the question that you get right and the -1/4 for each of the 4 questions that you miss would total up to 0. So essentially, you break even if you're randomly guessing. It doesn't help nor hurt your score to randomly guess on the SAT, and that's the whole point of the wrong answer penalty, is that it is designed so that there's no advantage or disadvantage to guessing on questions on the test. Now, if you're able to eliminate even 1 answer choice, now you're answering out of only 4 answer choices, and that means statistically you're going to get 1 out of 4 correct, which means 1 right and 3 wrong, which when you total that up, that'll give you a +1/4. And so forth and so on. As you can eliminate more choices, it becomes more and more to your advantage to go ahead and guess on those questions. So the one thing I want to really stress right here is that it's okay to guess on a question on the SAT. Now, when should you skip a question? It doesn't mean that we should go through and randomly guess on every question on the test. If you did that, as you can see here, your raw score, statistically speaking, would come out to be 0, which is certainly not what we're aiming for as our target score on the exam. But to choose when to skip questions, you want to choose based on time and nothing else. So for example, if you have 10 questions to go in a section, and let's say you only have maybe 2 minutes left, rather than race through and randomly bubble in something for those 10, in which case, in theory, if you got 2 of those right and 8 of those wrong, which statistically is what would happen, you'd come out with a raw score of 0 for those 10, meaning you're not gaining or losing anything by guessing on those. It would probably be to your advantage to go ahead and take those 2 minutes, take your time and answer maybe just 2 of those questions and get those 2 right, and then not race through and feel like you have to bubble in something for the other 8. So that's the takeaway message there, is that it's perfectly okay to omit questions. If you run short on time, then it's fine to leave a few questions blank, especially if it's questions maybe towards the end of the math section, which we know are the harder ones, or the last couple of sentence completions on the SAT, which have the toughest vocab that you're going to see. Those are good questions to omit if you're running short on time. But if you're not running short on time, it doesn't make sense to omit a significant number of questions because it's not helping or hurting your score to go ahead and answer those questions. Now let's take a look at another scenario that comes up quite often with a lot of my students. So here at Sanderson Test Prep, a lot of times students come in and they'll say something like, Chris, my target score in the SAT math is a 700. And in order to achieve that, my goal is to try to answer almost all of the questions, but sometimes I leave maybe 2 or 3 blank in a section, just the hardest ones, because I don't want to get the penalty for missing those. And oftentimes I point out to students that that's a fair strategy to, if you are going to skip questions, you do want to skip the harder ones, but let's just take a look at what your maximum possible score is based on the number of questions you answer. So the math section of the SAT in total, when you add up the total number of questions in all 3 sections, there's a total of 54. And if you skip 2 or 3 questions in each section, that means you're skipping about 8 questions on the exam as a whole, which means you'd be answering 46 out of those 54 questions on the exam as a whole. Now let's assume, and this is a very big assumption to make because it's extremely difficult to do, but let's assume that we were to get all 46 of the 46 questions that we chose to answer on the test. Let's say we got all 46 of them right. That would give us a raw score of 46, which is still very strong, but for students with a target score, let's say 700 and above, let's take a look at what that scales to. Your scaled score, if you get a raw score of 46, meaning you skip 8 questions and you answer everything else correct, your scaled score comes out to be a 680, which is certainly not too shabby. That's a very, very strong math score on your SAT, but it doesn't allow you to achieve that target score of 700 or above if you're skipping that many questions. And that's something that oftentimes students don't realize. So it's really important just to make sure that we understand there is a wrong answer penalty. The wrong answer penalty is there to design questions in such a way that if you guess, there's no distinct advantage to guessing, but there's also no distinct disadvantage to guessing. And if you skip too many questions, it sometimes can lower your maximum possible score to something lower than what your target score might be. So when it comes to your SAT exam, and when you get in that room on test day and you're deciding whether or not to skip a question, take a look at what's going on with the timing in the section. And if you feel pressed for time, that's a perfectly appropriate situation where you might want to omit the toughest few questions on a given section. But if you're not pressed for time, go ahead and give it a shot, and you might be very positively surprised at what your score ends up turning out to be. For more, please feel free to click here and visit our website. Thanks for watching.